Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Glad you guys are here. Process Thursday. We are gonna get going and a little bit different of a Process Thursday. If you've been here before, welcome back. If this is your first time, well, guess what? You're catching us on a different type of a Process Thursday because normally what I do is I actually sit down and I build a process. But I've been struggling today. I've been struggling for the last week. And the reason I've been struggling is because ultimately, I got to tell you something. This business is so simple. The land business is so simple that it's been all, for the most part, it's all been process mapped out. I don't really have a process that's the biggest pain point today. But I've been talking to some other real estate investors this week. And basically, one of the things I kept hearing, I kept seeing this pattern is like people were struggling to create processes and they're struggling to create workflows. So what I thought we would do is I thought we would just go back and look at a real world problem that has nothing to do with real estate investing. And a lot of times I get a lot of ideas and a lot of motivation from looking at other problems around the world and looking at how they create things or how solutions are created. And it gives me ideas on what I can do in my own business. Even if I don't use it today, it's still a framework. And I had it's funny. I had a problem in my life this week. It's a simple problem. It's quite comical. I'm going to share the video with you. And ultimately, I'm going to show you what the solution is. And ultimately, I'm going to show you how this big company, a very big company, makes the process kind of streamlined for their customers. And it has to do with what I teach every Thursday, which is that 7 steps in order to create a bulletproof process. And I'm going to go through the 7 steps tonight. But also, I realized as I was talking to these other, entrepreneurs this week, and I started to see this pattern that ultimately as entrepreneurs, there's one thing that we do very well, and I think it's completely wrong. So I decided that tonight we're going to talk about the secret, the true secret to building automated processes. And we're kind of going to go through this journey tonight. And I'm going to walk you through a pain point or a challenge that's in the real world that maybe you've had in your own life. But ultimately, it's a simple, stupid one. You're going to laugh at it. At least I hope you laugh at it. But ultimately, it comes down to one thing, and that is what do we need to do in order to create processes that are rock solid all the time? And there's just really one thing that comes down to, and I'll share it with you as we go through tonight. Now, before we get going, I just have a question for you. I'm asking you to make a guess here. Let me see if this thing works here. I just sent a message. I think it's going to go. It tells me it went. I don't know. Maybe you see it. There it goes. It took a second. In the chat, I just asked you a question. What do you think the secret I'm going to share with you tonight is? Let's see if you're a visionary. Let's see if you can project. What do you think tonight's secret's going to be when I reveal it? What do you think the secret is? Let's see if we're sending out the same messages tonight. I look forward to your comments in the chat there. Now, every week I talk about the 7 steps in order to build a bulletproof process or a process that works like clockwork. And tonight's not going to be any different. I'm going to walk you through these 7. So if you've been here before, bear with me. If this is your first time, I think this will help you out, okay? So let's walk through this here. And what I'm going to do is I got to share my screen. Okay, I think this works over here. Let's see. It does work. All right, there we go. All right, so let's talk about the 7 steps to build a bulletproof process. Step number 1 is I always talk about finding the pain point. And the pain point is really the starting point for everything. I don't care if you're outsourcing a team and building a team. What it comes down to is finding that pain point and then addressing that one thing. I always laugh because every time I go to a real estate conference and I'm presenting, the one question I always hear is, what's the first thing that you outsourced? What is the first thing you did? And doesn't matter what I did. The first thing I did was I was tired of sitting there screen scraping, cutting and pasting to build a list of people to mail to. I hated it. I couldn't stand it. I literally made it 21 days. And I thought to myself, if I do this one more time, I'm quitting. And by the way, whenever I feel that way, like if I do this one more time, I think I'm done. I know I'm past the breaking point. That becomes the pain point, and I got to get rid of it immediately. So, find the pain point and keep a list. Like, I'm getting tired of this thing, getting tired of that thing. Just keep a list and mark that thing off. And I think that will give you clarity of what you want to focus on at that point in time. Now, once you have that pain point in mind and you know what you want to do, well, the next step of this whole process is really to draw out the process. And you know that I'm a fan of process maps and drawing these things out. And you'll see like in the faded thing back there, that's my process. That is a process map there for the deal of the week. And ultimately, I think you have to draw this thing out. Now, I like to use swim lanes. If you don't like to use swim lanes and you just want to doodle it out, no problem. I had someone tell me once that they didn't like my swim lane approach, but they like to just draw out doodles. Like, I do this person does that. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be fancy. It could be on a napkin, for Pete's sake. If they can invent Southwest Airlines on a napkin at a bar, and I've been to that bar in San Antonio, by the way. It's that we actually had a Land Geek boot camp at that hotel where that bar is. Pretty cool. But if they can invent an entire airline on a napkin, I'm pretty sure that you can create your next business process on a piece of paper. See, that's the thing, is don't overcomplicate this thing. So I draw out the process of what I want it to be. I was talking to my wife tonight, or actually earlier today, and I was telling her, like, yeah, this is something I'm doing right here. It was about something completely different, but I was like, hey, listen, this is what we're doing over here. We're going to do something with the business like this. And she said, you know what? She's like, you told me you were going to do that years ago. And I said, yeah, I did, didn't I? She said, yeah. I said, I'm just now doing it. She's like, you do that all the time. You tell me you're going to do something, and then eventually you get around to doing it. And she's like, I think it's because you don't know how to do it at first, and then you go and figure it out. And that's exactly what happens. I can draw out this process map to be whatever I want. I could create my own dang airline on the back of a napkin. I'm not going to. I think it's a terrible business, by the way. But essentially, you could draw this thing out, and then you look at it, you're like, I don't know how to do this today. No problem. Keep on moving. Move on to the next pain point, or implement as much of it as you can. But plant the seed in the back of your head. Like, man, if I knew how to do this, I could do that. So draw that thing out. It will bring you clarity. If not for bringing it to fruition today, it will help your brain to know where you want to go, and it will start to help you think about that. The third step in this whole process is to think about the deliverables. And I'm going to show you again tonight. I'm going to show you how this gets executed in the real world. I'm going to show you how you can pull this thing off in the real world. And ultimately, we're going to figure this thing out. So what is the deliverable? Well, the deliverable is what I want the end of the process to look like. It could be a happy customer. It could be that I don't have to deal with it. It could be that my employees, okay, if I had a team of employees, what if the pain point was you're tired of being asked for vacation? Hey, can I take this week off? What if you're tired of being asked that question? What if you just wanted to automate that? Well, that would be your pain point. You'd map out the process, and you could workflow that entire thing. And the deliverable would be that the employee would know that they could take off, right? Like, that's the deliverable. Here's the end result. So when you begin with that end result in mind, it's like Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind. And I think that that's what happens a lot of times, is when we can get there, that's where we want to get to. Now, the fourth step in this whole process is to capture the inputs. I promise you this, tonight I'm going to show you how a big company is delivering just on these same steps. And I didn't copy them, and they didn't copy me. It's just what happens in the real world. But capture the inputs. Every workflow, every process is nothing more than data. It's taking data from here and moving it over here. It's just really moving data around. And I think ultimately you got to think about, okay, well, what are the data points that we absolutely need to make this process work? But, and I want to show you here tonight too, but you can also do too much. I'm going to show you this example tonight of what someone I think has gone too much, is they make it too complicated. All right, so the next step is that after you capture that input, you really got to think about what's going to trigger the input. Like, what is going to trigger this? Now, what are the triggers? What are these triggers we're talking about? Well, every process starts off with something. It could be the mail comes in. That could be the trigger of it. It could be that someone accepts your offer. That could be a trigger. It could be that your employee wants to request time off and they submit a form. That could be the trigger. The trigger could be someone paying. Stripe could be the trigger, or authorize.net, or what. There's various many reasons to have a trigger or ways to have a trigger. I think you have to like create the trigger and think about it, and you have to identify it, because once you identify it, you know what will start that workflow. Last week, I did a process for Process Thursday where the trigger was a calendar event, right? We want this to happen at this time. It was because we automated, last week's video was automating profit first. So I showed you how on the 10th and the 25th day of the month, this is what we do. We trigger a workflow on those days, the 10th and 25th day of the month. So you think about the trigger, what's it gonna be, and write it down. It's important to write it down. And then we go work on the workflow and start to build the workflow. And too many times people try to build the workflow first before they've laid out all of this. I was presenting at a conference once, and a guy comes up to me and he says, "Hey, what do you use Airtable for?" And I'm like, well, okay, I use Airtable for Landmodo, for example. I use Airtable to support some of my operations on Landmodo. And he's like, well, what else? And I'm like, it's pretty much it. He's like, it literally, he crossed his arms and he's like, well, how come everybody else is using Airtable? I said, I don't know. Like, you got to ask them. I don't know why they use Airtable. I don't use it for what they use it for. And to this day, I hear people say, like, I use Airtable for all this other stuff. I mean, do you use Airtable? Tell me what you use it for. I'd love to know what you use it for. And so he said to me, he's like, well, literally arms crossed. He says to me, well, I spent about 100 hours. I've spent about 100 hours trying to create an Airtable, and I can't figure out anything to create it with it. I can't figure out what I want to do with it. And I'm like, well, then why are you doing it? He's like, because everybody's doing it. And I think that's a problem, because ultimately what happens is, if we go back to this sixth step here, the building of a workflow, well, the building of a workflow starts when you have the problem laid out. He's going to build the workflow or the solution before he even knew what the problem was. How many times have you done that? I know I did it. When I got going into my business, I was adamant that I was not going to pay $20 a month to have some service keep track of everybody's balance. Absolutely not. Not $20 a month. No way. I kid you not. I probably spent about 60 hours programming an Excel spreadsheet, and I'm pretty good at Excel. Okay. Like, I'm not trying to be, braggy here. I'm just saying, like, I know what I'm doing with Excel. I probably spent about 60 hours. I made it 5 notes in and the thing blew up on me. And I'm like, should have spent the $20. It would have been a lot cheaper than spending 60 hours of my own time. So don't go looking for problems. Let the problems come to you. I'm sure you have enough of those problems. And see what happens. See what comes through to you. After you build the workflow, this is when you go into manager mode. And in manager mode, we sit back and we watch what happens. What do we need to tweak? What worked well? What didn't work well? It's really about laying out all of these things and then reacting. Run the process. This is the moment where I think, I always think of myself as the football coach. Football coach, they can get out there on the field during practice and they can tell, everybody what to do. But then, what happens is when it comes time to the actual game, they got to stand on the sidelines. When my kids were younger, I coached soccer for them. I've never played soccer my entire life. There was no coach. And, they were like, well, we can't form a team unless we have a coach. And I'm like, I'll do it. They're like, oh, great. How many years have you played? And I'm like, 0, no experience. I don't know nothing. I know nothing. I don't even know how to run a practice drill for soccer. Well, Google became my friend and I figured it out. But ultimately, when I was teaching them things, I'm out on the field running with them and everything. And then the game came and they're like, hey, you got to be over on the sidelines. And I'm like, well, I run with them. Like I tell them what to do while I'm running. They're like, on the sidelines. It's a completely different game. So when you run these management moments, you've got to let the manager in you take over and watch and revise. All right. So we got the 7 steps laid out. And what I want to do is, I still don't see you guys answering, what do you think the secret is? Because I'm going to give you the secret to making sure your processes are right. I don't see it. So chime in, let me know. Now, the thing is that I'm going to go through these 7 steps one more time with you, but I'm going to do it and I'm going to show you a real world problem. Okay. Like we're going to go back and we're going to look at this real world problem. And this is, like I said, this is a problem. This is a problem in my life this week. It's really stupid, but here, let's go back to this. What is the problem in my week? Look at this thing. This is outside of my house. And let me see how I triggered this thing. Okay, here we go. Let's see if this is the street light in front of my house. Look at this thing. All right. I don't know if I'm getting a message from the universe. I don't know if the Martians are speaking to me. I don't know what's going on there. But that is the most annoying thing you can have in your life. The most annoying thing you can have in your life is that light outside your house flickering like that. Like, can you, Michelle says the secret is the system. Maybe. We'll see. She's chiming in. Can you imagine this light, like lighting up your house? You're trying to watch TV. Is poltergeist coming? What's going on? My wife's like, how do we make that thing stop? And I'm like, I don't know. So I go back and I start looking at it. I'm like, okay, well, how do we make this thing stop? Well, you see, the problem here is mine. This is my problem, but ultimately it's the power company's problem. And so when you start to think about the problem, a lot of times business owners and managers, they start to think about, well, the problem, I can only fix problems that are mine. Well, you really have to think about the fixing problems that are your customers, right? Like that's really the refinement of the next strategy. Every business, if you can identify problems that your customers might have that impact your business and how they can communicate with you, for example, well, then you can fix these other things. Well, I'm not going to tell you that I went out and drew a process map, because I did not draw out a process map for this. But I guarantee you that the electric company has already drawn out that process map, right? Because they want to map out the solution to the problem. And the problem is that they don't want that bulb flickering like that. Now, they'll go out, the electric company will go out and they'll map out their solution to this whole problem. And, then step 3 here, what I teach you is step number 3. Well, step 3 was really thinking about the deliverable. Well, what is the deliverable? Well, the deliverable is that I want this truck in front of my house with this guy. I don't know can I zoom in on this? Yeah. Look, you get the guy out. Okay. The guy starts working on the light up there. I see him, and the thing is, he's down on the ground, like with this little box. And I'm like, hey, buddy, the problem's up there. Like the problem is the light. You need to see the video. He's like, no, I got it. So ultimately the successful goal of this process would be for someone to tell the electric company that the light's not working, and then the truck shows up. Well, before the power company can get that out here, what they had to do was they had to think about the inputs. Well, what are the inputs to get the truck out there? Well, what is it? Well, the most important thing is this. Apparently, every pole has a number. Who would have known? I mean, I knew that. I saw the numbers on the poles. I knew it had to be for something, but like until you need it, you don't know. Like, okay, I guess they're just numbering the poles. But you know what? The power companies thought about this thing. They said, look, if we put numbers on the poles, then everybody can identify the pole. So we just tell them the pole number. That's all I need to tell them, right? The pole number. And then what happens is when their customer has a problem who needs to trigger the input, because that's the next step, triggering the input. Well, how do you trigger the input? You call, right? Like you call. See, Google told me to call. And I'm like, what year is this? 2021? Who calls? So a little bit more research actually did show me that the power company has gotten a little bit more modern and sophisticated, all right, believe it or not. And they have a form. This is their form, right? Now, if you look at this, and what I want to do is I just want to flip over here. I'm going to flip back. And, okay, how do I do this? Okay, I got to, there we go. Okay, look, here's the form. Here's the form that the power company wants you to fill out. And when you look at this thing, you know, it's telling you, okay, look, don't call us. Don't call us. Use this form for reporting the streetlights. But look at what they're asking for. Name, first name, last name, email address, phone number. Okay, where's the street? Where's the street light? What is it? What is going on? Is it on a public road, commercial property, homeowners property? Do you pay for this light? Yes or no? What is the problem? Stays on, turns off and on. Other, please explain. See this? You can put in like flickers, like poltergeist is coming. I don't know. Does the pole have an identification number? Yes. Yes, it does. Well, what's the number? Exclude the dash, by the way. Okay, exclude the dash. What's the closest address and all of this other stuff? So apparently after you submit all of this other stuff, what happens is the next day, the truck comes out. The man comes out to fix the problem. Okay, like it sounds great, right? Well, it sounds fantastic. And it is when the system works. It really is. But see, here's the thing. You see, of all of that information that the power company was asking for, they're asking for all of this information, all of it. Where's it located? What about this? Why didn't they just say, what's your name, your email address, and your phone number? Start off at the top. Why not just say, hey, buddy, you got a poll number? Yes. What's the poll number? There's got to be a database of the poll numbers, right? Like, you with me? Like, why do they go through and ask for all this other information? Maybe if they didn't have it, they should ask, well, where's it located? Closest street? I mean, this form could be 5 fields big, but you see, it's 10 fields big because they're trying to cover all their bases. So ultimately, at some point, the user submits the data, and then the power company, well, then they've created a workflow. And today, when the guy came out today, and he's working on this situation, I asked him, like, hey, what is the process? What's the process that happens? Like, after I hit submit on the website, what happens? And he says, well, the ticket goes to our dispatch system, and the dispatcher looks at it and says, okay, well, here's the nearest, substation, or here's the nearest crew that works there. And then they give us the work tickets, and it appears on my inbox as work to do. So it shows up on his inbox as work to do, right? So ultimately, it's working through a digital electronic system that's designed to route all of the work where it needs to go, which is, well, that's what you would expect, right? Like that's what we create every week when we're dealing with our own processes. So ultimately, you're building a process, you're building that workflow, and then obviously the manager sits back and monitors the results and sees it. So what could go wrong here? Well, a lot could go wrong. Like my neighbor across the street tells me today, as she sees the truck out there, she's like, well, thank God they're here. I said, oh, was it bugging you too? And she's like, bugging me? What's been bugging me is I've been reporting this thing for like a week. And I was blown away that it was even lasting for a week, because I didn't know that this problem was lasting for a week. I didn't know that. But she said she's reported it 3 times in the last week to no avail. Like nothing's there. So it never got resolved. So what happened to the ticket? Now, we submitted one on Tuesday and the guy shows up today. It's Tuesday night, so it shows up today. So ultimately, did their system break down, or we don't know? But how many times you got to submit a ticket? You see, the thing about the workflows, and the thing I keep talking about the workflows, is there's one component in there that just always comes through. And the thing that you got to make sure that you do with your workflows and all of your processes is you've got to make sure that the workflow that you're doing follows one simple rule. Now, Todd says the secret to how to become the president of the HOA. Listen, I do not want to be the president of the HOA. No, that is probably a good idea. Like, if you want to be the HOA president, then that's what you do. Now, listen, I'm gonna take a little side note here because I want to tell you something. I want to tell you about Todd. Todd lives in the same county as I do. Like, we don't live too far apart. So I know that Todd feels the pain. If I told him, like, State Road 56 near the interstate, he probably is like, oh no, it's a painful experience. And like most parts of the country, roads are just messed up. We all know that. And I always tell my daughter, like, if I ever ran for political office, I'm just running on one platform. Fix the roads. Fix the roads. Make the roads great. That's what we need to do. Because then we could all drive to work and just no traffic. That's what we need to do. So Todd, I'll keep that idea if I ever want to run for the HOA, but I'm not going to run. All right. So what is the secret I keep talking about and keep teasing? Well, the secret to building these processes is really, it comes down to this one thing, and that is, I just knocked it off here. Jeez. Here we go. I got to have it going back. All right. The secret comes down to this. You're going to be like, what? It's this. Obviously, it's to keep it simple. Now, why did I have that build up? Because I get the ability to watch a lot of entrepreneurs build workflows and to build processes and to build systems, and they just make it too complicated all the time. Someone said to me this week, they said, what do you think about this system that does all of this stuff? And they start listing out all of the bullets that this system did. And I said, well, what do you need all that for? They said, I don't know. It sounds cool, doesn't it? Sounds complicated. See, complicated things don't work. Complicated things break down. I talk about the swim lanes all the time and building these swim lanes. And the thing that I learned early on about the swim lanes is this: every time you cross a swim lane or multiple swim lanes, like if you have work that goes from here to this person, to this person, to this person, back to, you have all this workflow that goes, every time it shifts to a different lane or every time it shifts to a different person, you have built in a flawed system. Think about that one for a minute. When I have to pass work to you, and you have to pass it to somebody else and they have to pass it to somebody else, what happens is work gets easily dropped. There's no guarantees when you pass work to somebody else that it actually gets there. And that's what makes system design so hard. So I always try to keep things at the minimum level. The systems that I use, the systems that I design, I try to keep them small and simple and to the least common denominator. I don't want a lot of moving pieces in what I'm doing. Because if I can keep it simple and keep it small and fight to keep it simple and keep it small, then I know that I'm on the right path. Take a look at this quote. And if you guys know me, I'm not a big quote person, but I think that this quote really just kind of nails it here. And that's this: is simple is harder than complex, right? Like, you've got to keep things simple and you've got to fight to keep things simple. You really do. Because when you can fight to keep things simple and you can keep out a lot of the other noise out there, all the bells and whistles, man, your processes get stronger, your business gets stronger. It's when people overcomplicate things, when they overcomplicate their businesses and they overcomplicate their systems, that it just becomes too overwhelming. Why is it that McDonald's, whose hamburgers are not that great, sorry, McDonald's, just saying, why do they sell so many hamburgers? It's not the quality of it. It's the system behind it. And why is it that McDonald's can run entire locations, thousands and thousands of locations, with basically minimum wage employees? Why? Because the systems are simple. Fight to get back to simple in everything that you're doing. Look at your processes as the manager in that last step and go, what do we need this for? Why do you need this thing? Many of you know that I was a vice president at the Hertz Corporation, and one of my first jobs, I obviously didn't start off as a vice president. I started off as a controller, a financial controller in one of the regions. And one of my first assignments was really to kind of understand what people were doing, watch what they were doing, and question it. So really to sit down and say like, well, why are you doing this? And I watched this employee one day, and I watched her for hours. And what she would do is we had these tickets, like these handwritten tickets where people would write down that they were called transporters. The transporters would write down, okay, we move this car from here to here. And it was a car log, basically. And what would happen was each of the car logs, the transporter logs, had a numerical number on it, like a sequential number. And they would pass them out. And this lady, what she would do is every day, like people would come in, they'd put these files, these forms into her basket, boom, 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 just basket. And what she would do is she would spend hours a day filing, literally hours a day filing. And I said to her, what are you doing? Like, she's like, well, we file this stuff. And I go, well, how are you filing it? Like, to me, you just get it, you 3-hole punch it and put it in a box or a binder or something. She said, no, we put it in sequential numerical order. And I said, why? Why do you do that? Like, what is it about that you do? Why do you do that? And she said, well, the reason is because in case anybody ever asks, do we have this? I know how to find it. And I'm like, well, how many times have anybody ever asked you? She's like, about once a year. So her entire job every single day was to do this thing that someone would ask her about once a year, maybe twice a year. It was insane. And I said, why did you start doing this? And she said, well, we started doing it once and we never stopped. It happens all the time. And you're building a business. Don't build in bureaucracies that you can fight and put off, because next thing you know, you're going to have someone who's doing something silly like filing something numerically, only for nobody ever to ask for it. So really think about these things as you take away and we close out tonight. I just have you think about these things. First, I want you to think about what are some things in your business that you've made complex. Okay, we all have them. And I have them in my own business. Well, I've made this a little too complex. What can you do to fight and get that stuff back, right? Like, what can we take back? Additionally, I would just challenge you with this, and that is that sit down and think about and ask yourself and put it out there. What is the pain point that you're going to fix this week? What are you going to fix today? Keep the list and make every day a day where you're punching off another thing. And before you know it, you know what you're going to have? You're going to have rock solid processes because you're following a normal pattern. And look, use these 7 steps that I talk about every week. Build processes that are bulletproof. And with that, I hope you got some value tonight. If you did, give this thing a thumbs up. And you know what? I'll see you guys next week, and have a nice evening. Take care. Thanks for being here.